Freddie Jones tramped over the spongy ground with a gun in one hand and a split stick in the other. He was making enough noise to scare off any wild thing within a half-a-mile radius, but he didn't have a damn to give. The sun was shining in a raw blue sky, and Freddie was waist-deep in reminiscence. Reminiscence, in this case, took the form of sawgrass and mud, the staples of Freddie's sweaty boyhood. Marriage had driven Freddie and the swamps apart, and business made the afternoon sun a stranger. But today was for seizing and then shooting, right through its flat reptilian skull. $1,000 was waiting for the man who bagged the longest python, and $1,500 for the hunter who could kill the most. A snake shot in 2 pieces was acceptable, 3 was suspect. But Freddie didn't need to splice his snakes together. He had a secret. Not 2 days earlier, he'd spotted one of the scaly bastards sliding across the asphalt into the preserve that backed his local gas and go, and he'd be damned if it wasn't the longest snake he'd ever seen. After 2 hours of prodding logs and stones, the would-be hunter had uncovered 3 sluggish king snakes, and more black racers than he'd bothered to count. Sweat ran down his neck and back, and the sound of the highway was the only confirmation that he hadn't been swallowed by a brown and green wilderness. Freddie was crouching in the sand, cursing the fire ants that had raided his left boot, when he caught a glimpse of something smooth and blotchy. The blotches moved, glinting in the sun. The undulation of scaly skin over muscle was unmistakable, and Freddie nearly tripped over his feet to cut a path through the brush. He could see the tapered tail now, but the animal was outpacing him, slicing and scrambling, heedless of his cut shins. He pursued the creature's end half till he saw it curve abruptly to the left. It stopped moving, and so did Freddie, winded, his heart thumping in his ears. He realized that he was shaking violently, sweat dancing over his forearms. For a moment, he was certain he had given himself a heart attack by running through the sand with the recklessness of a younger man. Blinking at the ground with a hand over his heart, he could see that the sand was shifting too. The earth beneath his feet was trembling. In the same instant, not 50 miles distant, a weather station was sending a coded signal to a secluded facility on the East Coast. Research Sector 09 received the untimely alert that SCP-001 was manifesting over Tampa. Aerial observation confirmed that the anomaly was significantly larger than previous manifestations and growing. Office windows vibrated with the sound of thunder, and children shrieked when classroom lights flickered. Half a country away, a hunter heard the same thunder. He grabbed his son by the jacket collar and tried to haul him out of the way of a buck with antlers that spread out like a sycamore. Low-lying branches couldn't snag the proud head, only snapped, showering splinters as the beast carved a trail of wreckage through the woods. The thunder that sounded from the depth of the sea was too faint for human ears, but along the New England shore, 17 pairs of binoculars caught a flash of white before their tour boat was crushed by a skyscraper's weight of barnacled flesh. No tourist or hikers had ventured far enough afield to see the strangely bulging earth in South Dakota's Black Hills, alone surrounded by locusts and prairie grass. The ancient bear king pawed his way toward the sunlight. He lumbered out of the dirt and collapsed, panting like a hatched chick. His curving teeth were longer than the grown man's arm, and the fur and skin that once stretched over his bones had long since rotted. The beast shook off his old flesh like dust and reared up on 2 legs. The lightning recognized his roar and raced to join him. In a similar wilderness, a tumble of rocks that had once been a mountain shook itself and groaned. The commuters on the highway looked toward the horizon to see the hunched back of a massive buffalo. In Texas, the cacti contorted themselves to make a path for the queen of armadillos. The bullfrogs hollered in the Louisiana swamps, drowning out the screams of boaters caught up in the paws of a hollow-eyed raccoon. A panther scream split the quiet of California's vineyards. Sprawling mansions enveloped by its shadow, and every sky was blotched with the nervous clouds of grackles, blackbirds, pigeons, and starlings. Freddy Jones was deaf to this great revival, too busy trying to keep his footing. The tremor passed almost as soon as it had begun, and Freddy glanced up to see that his prize python had not stirred an inch. If anything, there seemed to be more of it. He could make out its patterned back more clearly now, and beginning to make its way sideways along its length, guessing at the location of its head. He took 6 steps, moving loudly and awkwardly through the wire grass and saw palmetto. The tawny body stretched on and on. He took a step back, and another, trying to scope out its size, when the whole length gave a great shudder. Freddy glanced behind him and saw brown and blotches in the bush. He turned and turned again, and found himself surrounded by the same gleaming pattern, peeking through the sand and the greenery. There was no way to tell where the python began and where it ended. He raised his gun and shot at one broadside, which seemed impossibly to have swollen to the girth of a horse. The crack of the gun echoed over the swamp, but the scale slid on unblemished. Freddy gaped, too astonished to shout. His gaze was so fixed on the body growing thicker and longer into a loop around him that he never saw the great flat head that was rising above the trees. Not until it dipped to cover the sun. The yellow eyes never met with the watering gray ones, nor did the creature pay much heed to what flora and fauna were crushed beneath its coils. A tree-sized tongue flicked once, twice, and the beast turned to make its way toward the sea.